What if you were handed a secret list of movies so shocking, so transgressive, they were banned, censored, and whispered about for decades? Would you press play or look away? Welcome to the wild heart of 1970s exploitation cinema, where no taboo was off limits and every screening was an act of rebellion. Tonight, we'll drag you through 20 films that scandalized, terrified, and electrified audiences. Steel your nerves. Are you ready to experience the films that society tried and failed to bury? Number 1. Pink Flamingos, 1972. If cinema has a midnight heart, it beats in the outrageous, filth-caked reels of John Waters' Pink Flamingos. From its first frames, the film declares war on good taste, introducing Divine, a drag queen anti-hero who makes every taboo her personal playground. The story is a trash opera. Divine's family squares off against the equally deranged Marbles, who sell babies and kidnap women, all in a grotesque competition for the title of filthiest person alive. Waters films bestiality, incest, and public indecency with the same deadpan glee, daring the audience not just to watch, but to cheer. Shot guerrilla style in Baltimore for next to nothing, Pink Flamingos sparked midnight movie culture, screenings where audience members howled, gagged, and applauded in equal measure. Waters became infamous for mailing soap to British censors who demanded cuts. Divine's infamous dog poop scene became a kind of cinematic litmus test. Are you in or are you out? What was once prosecuted as obscenity is now revered as ground zero for queer cinema and outsider art. The film endures because it's fearless, weirdly joyous, and fundamentally honest about its own depravity. Pink Flamingos is not for everyone, maybe not for most people, but those who love it with a fever no amount of soap could ever clean. Number 2. Super Vixens, 1975. If cartoonish sex, bad taste, and over-the-top violence are your thing, Russ Meyer's Super Vixens is the holy grail. It's a technicolor fever dream where every woman is a hypersexual Amazon, every man a pervert or a fool, and every scene an excuse for outrageous sight gags or bare skin. The plot, what there is of it, follows ranch hand Clint, who is framed for murder by a corrupt, sex-crazed cop, and finds himself on the run, betting a parade of super vixens with outlandish names like Super Soul and Super Cherry. Meyer, always the iconoclast, makes the violence as over-the-top as the nudity. Super Angel's murder, played for dark laughs, is as cartoonish as a Looney Tunes short, with geysers of blood and impossible slapstick. Critics were divided between horror and admiration. Was it pornography, satire, or some weird new hybrid? The film was banned or heavily cut in multiple territories, but its reputation only grew. Fans marveled at Meyer's rapid editing, his wild use of color and sound, and his uncanny ability to make the outrageous seem almost normal. Super Vixens is both a parody of exploitation and its purest distillation, loud, fast, lewd, and impossible to forget. A pop art ode to sex, violence, and total cinematic anarchy. Number 3. Sugar Cookies, 1973. Lloyd Kaufman, yes, the trauma guy, and a young Oliver Stone teamed up for Sugar Cookies, a strange, seductive blend of softcore eroticism and Hitchcockian noir. The plot reads like an erotic fever dream. Mary Woronov plays a manipulative model who seduces and films her lover's murder, then sets out to find a lookalike to play the victim in a twisted snuff fantasy. The line between reality and fantasy blurs, and the film becomes a dizzy, glittering descent into voyeurism and sexual power games. What sets Sugar Cookies apart is its style. Instead of grimy handheld shots and sweaty desperation, the film luxuriates in moody, artful lighting and chic, early 70s set design. The jazzy lounge soundtrack purrs beneath scenes of bubble baths and candlelit seductions, making everything feel dangerous but strangely beautiful. There's an art house soul beneath the exploitation shell, a sense that Kaufman and Stone are having a sly conversation with the audience about the very nature of watching and being watched. Mainstream distributors were wary, but the drive-in crowd devoured it, especially once the film's more explicit moments hit the rumor mill. Decades later, Sugar Cookies is remembered less for its nudity and more for its stylish, twisted meditation on desire, control, and the blurry boundaries of cinema itself. Number 4. Faces of Death, 1978. Long before YouTube reaction videos or shock horror clickbait, Faces of Death dared audiences to look at what society usually hides. Directed by John Allen Schwartz, this legendary Mondo film stitches together a wild patchwork of autopsy rooms, animal slaughterhouses, and grotesque stunts, blending actual documentary footage with theatrical reenactments that dared you to figure out what was real. The most infamous sequence, a so-called monkey brain banquet, was faked in a restaurant's back room, but viewers at the time didn't know or care. Marketed with lurid claims of being banned in over 40 countries, Faces of Death became an underground legend. Teens rented battered VHS copies from video stores and dared each other to watch the infamous opening autopsy, the electrocutions, the gory animal sequences. Moral guardians were scandalized. Parents lobbied for outright bans. Naturally, every kid had to see it. Its mystique only grew with every urban legend. Was that scene real? Did anyone faint? For many, the fear was less about what was on screen and more about what the film represented. A world with no filter, no comfort, and no taboos. Today, Faces of Death feels more like a time capsule than a true horror film, but its impact lingers, a primal dare that still chills the curious and the unwary. Number 5. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. If there's a single film that encapsulates the taboo-smashing audacity of 1970s exploitation, it's Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. Set in a Nazi medical camp, Diane Thorne stars as Ilsa, a sadistic commandant obsessed with proving women can endure more pain than men. What follows is a barrage of torture, sexual humiliation, and gory experiments, all staged with a lurid glee that manages to be both mesmerizing and deeply uncomfortable. Shot on repurposed Hogan's Heroes sets in Canada, the film's sleaze factor is cranked to 11. Boiling water, tests, forced surgeries, sexual games with prisoners, and an unending parade of graphic punishments. Yet, behind the shock, Ilsa herself became an icon of exploitation, a dominatrix in jackboots and tight uniforms, wielding her sexuality as both weapon and armor. For censors, the movie was an instant red flag. Germany banned it outright, while most countries cut or buried the nastiest scenes. But its reputation only grew, spawning 3 equally outrageous sequels and countless rip-offs. Some see it as pure, indefensible trash, others as a strange, cathartic commentary on power and gender. One thing's certain, no one who endures its 2-hour onslaught forgets Ilsa's steely stare or the movie's operatic excess. Love it or loathe it, this film remains one of grindhouse cinema's most infamous jaw-dropping spectacles, proof that the 70s held nothing sacred. Number 6. Blood-Sucking Freaks, 1976. Step right up to the most notorious theater in the grindhouse circuit, where sadism and sleaze take center stage in Blood-Sucking Freaks. The plot, if you can call it that, follows Sardu, a demented showman who runs a Grand Guignol theater of torture in New York's seedy underbelly, assisted by his grotesque dwarf henchman, Ralphus. What starts as staged horror quickly spirals into real-life mutilation and mind-bending depravity. Women are hypnotized, mutilated, and turned into brainless sex zombies for the pleasure of a paying audience that applauds every atrocity. Director Joel M. Reed pushes the envelope with wild abandon, serving up buckets of blood, severed limbs, and a bottomless pit of misogyny, so much that the film was banned or heavily censored in multiple countries. Critics panned it as tasteless trash, but it found a cult audience who reveled in its excesses, especially once Lloyd Kaufman and Trauma rescued it from obscurity. Its reputation as a punk rock rite of passage grew, screened at wild parties, quoted by shock musicians, even referenced in horror conventions as the ultimate I dare you viewing experience. The film walks a razor's edge between satire and exploitation, skewering both the audience's appetite for violence and the art world's pretensions. To this day, it remains one of the most infamous artifacts of 1970s splatter cinema, shocking, revolting, and impossible to ignore. Number 7. Caged Heat, 1974. Before Jonathan Demme became an Oscar-winning director, he cut his teeth on the wild, whip-cracking world of women in prison films, and Caged Heat is his feverish debut. Forget the polite restraint of later Demi classics. This is pure grindhouse pulp, dripping with sweat, sarcasm, and just enough surrealism to make you wonder what you're actually watching. The plot kicks off when a young woman, played by the magnetic Joanne Harris, is thrown into a brutal women's correctional facility, ruled by Barbara Steele's sadistic wheelchair-bound warden. Showers are communal, the guards are predatory, and escape plans are hatched between strip searches and group therapy sessions that turn into brawls. But Demi injects something different, an undercurrent of sly, proto-feminist satire that skewers the system, even as it revels in exploitation tropes. Dream sequences slide into the narrative, fantasies of freedom and vengeance with women dreaming of agency and justice. There are catfights, riot scenes, and jailbreak attempts, but they're filmed with a wink, poking fun at the genre's excesses while still delivering the goods. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Was it parody, homage, or just plain trash? Audiences, however, packed the midnight screenings, relishing the rebellious spirit and sly subversion. Today, Caged Heat stands as a high-water mark of the women in prison genre, a film as unpredictable and unruly as the inmates themselves. Number 8. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1773. Sweden isn't the first country that springs to mind for grindhouse excess, but Thriller, A Cruel Picture is a rare, brutal gem from the icy north. Christina Lindberg stars as Frigga, a young woman rendered mute after a childhood trauma, who is kidnapped, addicted to heroin, and forced into prostitution by a ruthless pimp. What follows is a transformation from victim to avenger. Frigga spends a year secretly training in martial arts, marksmanship, and stunt driving, plotting her bloody payback. Director Bo Arne Vibenius mixes explicit violence, slow-motion action, and even hardcore inserts in some versions, making Thriller notorious among collectors and censors alike. Swedish authorities demanded massive cuts. The full uncut version became a grail for exploitation fans worldwide. The film's eye-popping imagery, Lindbergh's eye patch, her cold stare, her relentless pursuit, directly inspired Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill and cemented its status as a cult classic. Thriller's narrative is simple, but its execution is pure pulp poetry, blending grindhouse sleaze with arthouse style. For viewers able to stomach its excesses, it's a singular experience, an icy, uncompromising revenge odyssey with a heroine who turns every tool of her abusers into a weapon of liberation. Number 9. I Spit on Your Grave, 1778. Few films provoke as intense a reaction as I Spit on Your Grave. From its infamous opening, where Jennifer Hills, a young writer, endures a brutal, extended assault by a group of small-town men, to its blood-soaked payback, the movie never lets up. For some, it's an endurance test. For others, a fiercely angry statement on vengeance and survival. The film spends nearly half its runtime in the aftermath of violence, as Jennifer slowly, methodically hunts down each of her attackers, turning everyday objects, a bath, a boat, a hatchet, into instruments of retribution. Director Mir Zarki claimed he wanted to confront audiences with the reality of sexual violence, stripping away the lurid gloss of Hollywood thrillers. Critics, most famously Roger Ebert, called it garbage, and many countries banned it outright or forced heavy edits. Yet, feminist critics have sometimes defended it, arguing that it gives Jennifer full agency and refuses to let viewers off the hook with easy answers or comforting moral lessons. Love it or hate it, the film remains infamous, a raw, uncompromising portrait of trauma and revenge that's impossible to forget. I Spit on Your Grave is not entertainment in the usual sense, but a cinematic gut punch that still divides, shocks, and, yes, demands to be reckoned with. Number 10. Hollywood Boulevard, 1976. Before Joe Dante and Alan Arkush made their names in mainstream Hollywood, they unleashed a riotous love letter to the very bottom of the film industry with Hollywood Boulevard. Framed as a meta-comedy about the making of B-movies, the film follows bright-eyed Candy Rylson as she lands a job at the hilariously cheap Miracle Pictures. If it's a good picture, it's a miracle. From there, it's a whirlwind of washed-up stars, dime-store directors, and crew members who will risk life and limb for a day's work or a fleeting moment on camera. Dante and Arkush fill the movie with knowing winks, inside jokes, and outright parodies, while also raiding producer Roger Corman's vast archive of stock footage to pad out the action. The result is a chaotic mosaic of car chases, jungle shootouts, and Amazonian brawls, with every cliché lovingly lampooned. The movie pokes fun at exploitation's excesses. Gratuitous nudity is delivered with a nod and a grin, and the body count stacks up alongside the jokes. Yet, despite the satire, there's genuine affection for the weird, wild world of low-budget cinema. Hollywood Boulevard is a time capsule of 70s schlock and self-awareness, a film for movie lovers who appreciate both the ridiculous and the sublime, and aren't afraid to laugh at the spectacle of cinematic survival. Number 11. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left is a landmark in horror, not just for what it shows, but for how it makes you feel. Inspired by Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring, Craven drags the tale into the American heartland, where innocence is ripped apart by random violence. Two teenage girls, seeking a little adventure, fall prey to a gang of escaped convicts. The scenes of abduction, humiliation, and murder are filmed with a documentary rawness that makes them almost unbearable. There's no stylized escape, no comforting distance, just the ugly, relentless grind of real terror. But the film doesn't end with victimhood. In a now famous reversal, the killers inadvertently seek refuge in the home of one of their victims. The parents' discovery leads to an eruption of vigilante violence. Circular saws, shotguns, and bloody justice served cold. Audiences in the 70s were shocked not just by the brutality, but by how it reflected the era's anxieties about the Vietnam War, the breakdown of the American family, and the thin veneer of civilization. Marketing urged viewers to keep repeating, "It's only a movie," but the impact lingered long after the credits rolled. Last House on the Left remains one of the most powerful, divisive, and influential exploitation films ever made, a descent into hell with no safety rails. Number 12. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. When it comes to films that burrow under your skin and refuse to leave, few rival Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Shot on sunburned 16mm film and populated by actors willing to suffer for their art, this film shattered boundaries by making its rural Texas landscape feel alive with menace and rot. Ironically, it's far less gory than its reputation suggests. Much of its horror is suggested through the relentless, nerve-shredding soundtrack and raw, documentary-style visuals. Leatherface, the lumbering, flesh-masked butcher, doesn't just chase victims. He explodes into scenes, slamming doors and waving his chainsaw in a demented dance that's become iconic. The infamous dinner scene is pure nightmare fuel, cackling, shrieking, claustrophobic. British censors refused to certify the film, while American drive-ins turned it into a word-of-mouth phenomenon. Tobe Hooper reportedly wanted a PG rating, but what he got was infamy, debate, and midnight movie immortality. 40 years on, the grime, the sweat, the dread, none of it has faded. The film is routinely dissected in film schools, but no analysis can quite explain the primal terror that grabs your stomach as Sally runs screaming into the dawn, Leatherface howling and spinning, both victim and monster, in a world gone totally mad. Number 13. The Beast in Heat, 1977. Few films test the boundaries of taste and endurance like The Beast in Heat. Birthed from the notorious Italian Nazi-exploitation cycle, this film throws every conceivable outrage onto the screen. The plot, such as it is, centers around a sadistic Nazi doctor, Ellen Krach, who has engineered a mutant beast, caged and perpetually aroused, to terrorize and assault female prisoners. The setting, a World War II POW camp, where every day brings new horrors, graphic torture, sexual assault, and random violence that barely feign any connection to real history. The film's exploitative extremes earned it both infamy and a spot on the UK's banned video nasty list. What sets The Beast in Heat apart isn't just the taboo content, but the unhinged, almost surreal way it careens from cheap war movie battle scenes, often spliced from unrelated footage, to grotesque horror. There's no real attempt at narrative coherence. Instead, the movie bombards viewers with one provocation after another, daring you to keep watching. For some, It's the cinematic equivalent of an endurance test. For others, a morbid curiosity and collector's holy grail. Decades on, it remains one of exploitation's most notorious relics, a movie people talk about in shocked whispers, its title alone enough to unsettle even seasoned horror fans. Number 14. SS Experiment Camp, 1976. Few films on the video nasty list earned their notoriety with such calculated provocation as SS Experiment Camp, an Italian Nazi-exploitation shocker set in a hellish World War II death camp. The movie doesn't just push the boundaries of taste, it incinerates them. The story, if you can bear to call it that, centers around a sadistic Nazi officer, Dr. Steiner, obsessed with medical experiments that involve sexual mutilation, forced sterilization, and attempts to create a new Superman. Victims are paraded, tortured, and humiliated in scenes designed to outrage both history and decency. The film's marketing doubled down on its scandalous imagery, including a poster featuring a crucified naked woman, which was banned or censored in many countries. The UK government seized and destroyed tapes, while Germany and Australia refused any official release. Some argued that the film's over-the-top brutality and sexual sadism make it little more than cheap exploitation, while others see a subversive, if accidental, commentary on authority and abuse. Whatever your view, SS Experiment Camp became a symbol of the video nasty era, a film spoken about in hushed, scandalized tones by both fans and foes. Today, it's as much a piece of exploitation folklore as a movie, its title evoking memories of an era when censors battled, collectors hunted, and the line between history and horror was trampled into the mud. Number 15. Fight for Your Life, 1977. If you want to understand why some grindhouse films caused real-world outrage, look no further than Fight for Your Life. This movie doesn't tiptoe around controversy, it headbutts it. The premise is simple and explosive. 3 violent convicts, led by a seething racist white supremacist, break into the home of a devout black family and unleash a night of humiliation, racial slurs, and psychological torment. For much of the film, the family is beaten down, their dignity and faith tested to the breaking point. But the real fireworks come in the last act, when Patriarch Reverend Turner turns the tables, meting out biblical retribution that is as brutal as it is cathartic. The film was banned outright in the United Kingdom and caused headaches for censors in the US, not just because of its violence, but its relentless barrage of racist language and themes. Is it a condemnation of hatred or exploitation of real pain? Even decades later, debate rages among critics and viewers. What can't be denied is its raw, confrontational power. There's a nervous energy to every scene. No one is safe, nothing is predictable, and when the final reckoning arrives, it's both a release and a gut punch. Fight for Your Life is not an easy film, but it's a landmark of grindhouse extremity, a movie that dares you to look and then makes you pay for watching. Number 16. The Big Bird Cage, 1972. Take the wildest elements of the women in prison genre, catfights, sadistic guards, doomed escape attempts, and set them in a steamy, lawless jungle, and you get The Big Bird Cage. Director Jack Hill, already a veteran of exploitation cinema, brings together Pam Grier and Sid Haig for a riotous tale of revolution, camaraderie, and jungle justice. The titular Bird Cage is a grim sugar mill where women are imprisoned, overworked, and brutalized by a cast of over-the-top villains. Pam Grier's Blossom is a force of nature, sexy, tough, and fiercely independent, who fakes her own arrest to infiltrate the prison and spark a full-scale uprising. Sid Haig, her anarchist partner, adds comic mayhem and political subtext to the mix. The movie is filled with wild brawls, quicksand struggles, and jailbreak madness, all set to a funky score that keeps the energy high. Unlike some mean-spirited entries in the genre, The Big Bird Cage infuses its chaos with a sense of solidarity and fun. When the women finally revolt, it's a cathartic, fist-pumping moment of triumph. Hill's camera revels in both exploitation excess and genuine empowerment, making the film a beloved cult classic and a standout in the crowded jungle of grindhouse cinema. Number 17. The Arena, 1974. Imagine the ultimate drive-in fever dream. Pam Grier, having already conquered blaxploitation as Coffee and Friday Foster, is kidnapped, stripped of her agency, and dumped in the dust of ancient Rome. In the arena, she and Margaret Markov are sold into gladiator servitude and forced to brawl for a leering toga-clad crowd. The formula is pure 1970s exploitation alchemy. Take the ferocity of a women in prison flick, swap the barred windows for the marble columns of Cinecittà's leftover Ben-Hur sets, and let the catfight spiral into all-out rebellion. Greer, always magnetic, wields her trident with Amazonian rage, her sweat and determination outshining even the studio's recycled armor. Critics at the time sneered at its tacky feminism, with its topless combat and slow-motion breastplates, but audiences loved it, a guilty pleasure history lesson, as lurid and excessive as a tabloid headline. The soundtrack by Francesco Damazzi pulses under the action, giving the whole saga an unmistakable groove that places it squarely in the grindhouse pantheon. There's a certain punk energy here, as our heroines inspire a slave uprising, turn the tables on their captors, and unleash the very lions meant for their doom. The arena remains a pulpier, bloodier cousin to Spartacus, best enjoyed with popcorn, a flask of something cheap, and an appreciation for cinematic sweat and subversion. Number 18. Lady Snowblood, 1973. In the icy snowscapes of Meiji-era Japan, vengeance blooms like a crimson flower in Lady Snowblood. The film's heroine, Yuki, born in prison, trained since childhood in swordplay and revenge, is an unstoppable force on a singular mission: avenge her mother's rape and the murder of her family. Every duel she fights is a ballet of stylized violence, with geysers of bright red blood spraying across pristine white snow. The film's structure is as elegant as its violence is shocking, told in flashbacks, split screens, and poetic voiceover. Lady Snowblood is as much art house as grindhouse. Director Toshia Fujita crafts a world where beauty and brutality intertwine. Meiko Kaji, with her icy stare and haunting theme song, became an icon, inspiring countless imitations. Quentin Tarantino paid direct homage in Kill Bill, borrowing not just visuals, but the very mood and spirit of the film. Japanese censors rated it for adults only, but audiences flocked to see Yuki's journey, making the film a box office hit and spawning a sequel. Lady Snowblood endures as one of cinema's most memorable revenge tales, lyrical, violent, and unforgettable. A story where justice is as cold and implacable as the winter wind, and vengeance is written in blood on snow. Number 19. Foxy Brown, 1974. No one embodied 1970s exploitation cool quite like Pam Grier, and Foxy Brown stands as her fiercest, most uncompromising showcase. Grier's Foxy is a one-woman wrecking crew, posing as a high-class call girl to infiltrate a vicious heroin syndicate, torching the villain's limo, and dispatching henchmen with everything from shotguns to razor blades hidden in her afro. Every scene pulses with danger, wit, and outrage. Director Jack Hill doesn't just use blaxploitation tropes, he supercharges them. Saturated colors, funk-heavy soundtrack, snappy dialogue, and a social conscience sharpened to a blade. The film's violence is cathartic, not gratuitous. Foxy's anger feels righteous, and Grier channels the real frustrations of the era's racial and gender politics. British censors panicked. American TV versions were hacked to bits, but nothing could stop Foxy's swagger. The film's legendary climax, Foxy strutting past dumbfounded cops, the villain's manhood pickled in a jar, became an instant classic, a moment of feminist triumph wrapped in grindhouse bravado. Grier's performance is the stuff of legend, and the film's fearless mix of social satire, over-the-top action, and genuine pathos makes it not just a blaxploitation essential, but a towering figure in the whole exploitation genre. Foxy Brown didn't just kick open doors, she burned down the whole house and danced through the ashes. Blackula, 1972. Some titles are so outrageous they become cultural shorthand. Blackula was meant to be just a quick cash-in on the blaxploitation boom, an African prince turned vampire in 1970s Los Angeles. But what emerged was a cult horror classic that mixed supernatural chills with real social commentary. William Marshall plays Prince Mamuwalde, who's cursed by Dracula himself, and awakens centuries later to stalk the city in search of blood, love, and justice. Marshall's performance is regal, tragic, and deeply human. No mere monster, but a victim of colonialism and prejudice, lashing out at a world that never accepted him. The film's funky score and gritty LA setting give Blackula an energy all its own. It's part police procedural, part tragic love story, and part old-fashioned monster movie, but it never feels like a simple parody. The scenes of Mamuwalde confronting bigotry and violence resonate beyond the vampire trappings, giving the film unexpected weight. Critics sneered at the title, but audiences flocked to theaters, making Blackula a box office hit and paving the way for a sequel and countless imitators. Today it's recognized as an essential piece of black horror cinema, proof that even the most outrageous premises can deliver thrills, pathos, and a fresh bite of cultural subversion. Which one are you brave enough to watch first? Which story will you dare to tell your friends about at midnight, when the lights are low and you can almost hear the flicker of a battered projector in the background? If you loved this deep dive into cinema's wildest corners, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more film history, hidden gems, and stories the mainstream is too scared to tell. Got a favorite Grindhouse classic or a personal midnight movie memory? Drop it in the comments. We want to hear all your wildest recommendations and wildest tales. Until next time, keep your mind open, your popcorn hot, and always remember, in the world of exploitation, there are no rules, only legends. Italian cinema has always thrived on excess, whether it's horror dripping with crimson or thrillers that push paranoia to the edge. But when Italy decided to take on science fiction, the results were anything but ordinary. These weren't sleek Hollywood blockbusters. They were wild, experimental, and sometimes downright shocking. What happens when you mix cosmic dread, political fury, and puppet monsters with Italian flair? Let's dive into 15 Italian sci-fi films that didn't just entertain. They left audiences rattled, confused, and sometimes flat-out terrified. Planet of the Vampires, 1965. Picture this. Two spacecrafts land on a mysterious fog-covered planet, and within minutes, the crews are turning on each other under some eerie alien influence. That's Planet of the Vampires, directed by Mario Bava, the undisputed master of Italian atmosphere. It's less about traditional bloodsuckers and more about parasitic entities hijacking human bodies, turning colleagues into sudden enemies. Audiences in 1965 had never seen outer space look this unsettling. The sets were minimalist, yet drenched in colored gels that made everything glow like a psychedelic nightmare. What makes this film legendary is its influence. Ridley Scott's Alien didn't come out of nowhere. Critics have long noted that Planet of the Vampires set the blueprint with its derelict spaceship, skeletonized alien remains, and creeping sense of doom. And while Hollywood had money, Bava had ingenuity. He used mirrors, smoke, and lighting tricks to make cheap sets look vast and otherworldly. The tension wasn't in giant battles or lasers, but in the horror of possession. What if the person standing next to you wasn't really themselves anymore? It shocked audiences not just because of the creepy visuals, but because it dared to blend genres. At its core, it was gothic horror disguised as sci-fi, dripping with dread rather than optimism. No shiny future, no heroic astronauts, just paranoia and the slow realization that humanity isn't as in control of the universe as it thinks. Planet of the Vampires might not have been a huge box office hit, but it crawled under the skin of film history. To this day, it's remembered as one of the most visually stunning and quietly terrifying Italian sci-fi experiments. The Day the Sky Exploded, 1958. Before Bava's Planet of the Vampires, there was The Day the Sky Exploded, often hailed as Italy's first science fiction feature. Released in 1958, this film dared to imagine global annihilation at a time when audiences were already on edge from the real-life nuclear arms race. The setup is deceptively simple. The launch of the world's first nuclear rocket goes wrong, fragments an asteroid, and sends deadly meteor clusters hurtling toward Earth. Suddenly, humanity has only days to act before certain destruction. The film leaned heavily on stock footage, newsreels of rockets, military maneuvers, even natural disasters, but Bava's cinematography stitched it together into something uncanny. The montage of global panic was shocking for its realism. For Italians in the late 1950s, who had rarely seen their own filmmakers tackle outer space, this was a cinematic jolt. Instead of American optimism, this movie played like a countdown to doom, painting science not as mankind's savior, but as a ticking time bomb. Audiences were unsettled by its bleakness. Unlike many American counterparts where a lone hero saves the day, this story spread the weight across nations as if to say, no one country has the answers. That perspective felt daring at the time, especially during Cold War tensions. It may not have had sleek effects or Hollywood grandeur, but the way it suggested Earth itself was fragile and vulnerable shocked viewers. Imagine watching the skies differently after leaving the theater. While it didn't become a massive international hit, its legacy is historic. It opened the door for Italian sci-fi to exist at all. More importantly, it proved that Italy could create its own brand of cosmic terror. If you were expecting Rocketman and adventure, the day the sky exploded blindsided you with existential dread. H2S 1969. Few films carry the scars of censorship as deeply as H2S. Released in 1969, or rather barely released, this dystopian sci-fi tackled themes so politically charged that it was immediately banned. Imagine a future society run by an oppressive regime, where conformity is demanded and rebellion is crushed. That's the world H2S dared to present at the height of student protests sweeping across Europe. Roberto Faenza's direction leaned heavily into surreal imagery. Students in bizarre uniforms stage protests. Hallucinatory sequences blur reality and imagination, and the story barrels toward inevitable crackdown. It wasn't spaceships or monsters that shocked audiences. It was the way the film held up a mirror to their own reality. Young Italians in 1969 were already clashing with authority. To see those struggles projected onto a bleak sci-fi canvas felt like gasoline thrown on the fire. The government thought so too. Censors quickly pulled the film, claiming it was incendiary. For years, it remained underground, whispered about more than actually seen. That made it even more legendary. The film's shock value wasn't in gore or spectacle, but in its fearless politics. It turned the sci-fi genre into a weapon, something Hollywood rarely dared to do so bluntly. When it resurfaced years later, critics hailed it as a forgotten gem, proof that Italian sci-fi could be bold and confrontational. Watching it now, the heavy symbolism and dated style might feel strange, but the message still burns. Science fiction can be the sharpest tool for rebellion. In that sense, H2S shocked audiences by proving the genre could terrify not with aliens, but with authority itself. The Puma Man, 1970. If you thought Italian sci-fi couldn't get weirder, along came The Puma Man. This bizarre superhero outing tried to mash up American comic book energy with European filmmaking quirks, and the result was so wild it stunned audiences into silence. The premise? A mild-mannered paleontologist discovers he's the chosen heir to an ancient alien race and gains the powers of a puma. Yes, flight, strength, and mystical destiny, all wrapped in a costume that looked more like pajamas than a heroic suit. What shocked viewers wasn't just the outlandish plot, but the execution. The special effects looked decades out of date, even for the late 70s, with awkward flying scenes that made Superman look like a documentary. The villains, led by Donald Pleasance in one of his most eccentric roles, felt menacing one moment and comically over the top the next. This strange tonal balance gave audiences whiplash. Was it supposed to be scary? Funny? Heroic? Nobody could quite tell. Despite its flaws, or maybe because of them, the Puma Man carved out cult status. Audiences weren't shocked in terror, but in disbelief. How did this film even get made? And yet, buried under the camp, it offered a unique Italian spin on the superhero genre before that genre became Hollywood's cash cow. Warrior of the Lost World, 1983. If Mad Max crashed into Italian exploitation cinema, the wreckage would look like Warrior of the Lost World. Released in 1983, this post-apocalyptic saga stunned audiences with its sheer scale and chaotic energy. At the center was a lone motorcyclist, armed with a talking bike named Einstein, trying to overthrow a totalitarian regime in a wasteland full of gangs, mutants, and brutal overlords. Audiences were shocked, not because the story was groundbreaking, but because of how unapologetically it leaned into excess. The villains were cartoonishly cruel, the gangs looked like they'd raided a heavy metal music video, and the action sequences often felt like a blend of improvisation and chaos. Yet somehow, that scrappiness became part of the film's charm. The biggest surprise came from its international ambition. Shot in Italy but designed to appeal worldwide, it tried to cash in on the popularity of post-apocalyptic cinema. And while critics mocked its campiness, audiences couldn't look away. The talking bike alone became a symbol of how bizarre the movie was willing to get. Was it silly? Absolutely. Was it shocking in its ambition to outdo Mad Max on a fraction of the budget? Without question. The film gained cult notoriety, especially in the United States, where it played late-night TV and became a favorite target of movie riffers. To this day, people remember Warrior of the Lost World less for its polish and more for its audacity. Audiences didn't expect Italy to swing this wildly into the apocalypse, and the shock of it all is why it still lingers in pop culture memory. Shocking Dark, 1989. The title wasn't lying. Shocking Dark was exactly that. Shocking. Known internationally as an outrageous ripoff of James Cameron's Aliens and the Terminator, this 1989 film by Bruno Mattei left audiences wide-eyed. Set in a post-apocalyptic Venice, it followed a squad of commandos battling mutant creatures in the city's toxic underground tunnels. The shock came from its shamelessness. Audiences recognized entire scenes lifted almost directly from Hollywood blockbusters, but twisted through the lens of Italian exploitation. Soldiers stomped through corridors barking cheesy dialogue, creatures attacked with rubbery ferocity, and the movie climaxed with an ending ripped straight out of the Terminator. Instead of embarrassment, the filmmakers leaned into the chaos, creating something so brazen that it stunned everyone who watched it. Beyond plagiarism, though, the film delivered a bleak vision of Venice drowning in pollution and corporate control. For Italian viewers, that backdrop hit closer to home than Hollywood's distant space colonies. It was both absurd and strangely prescient. Audiences were divided. Some were furious at its lack of originality, while others were thrilled by its sheer audacity. Over time, that shock value turned it into a cult classic. Today, Shocking Dark is remembered less as a failure and more as a time capsule of Italian cinema's willingness to copy, distort, and exaggerate global trends. It may not have been original, but it was unforgettable. Star Odyssey, 1979. If you thought low-budget sci-fi couldn't get any stranger than sock puppets or mutant bikers, enter Star Odyssey. Released in 1979, hot on the heels of Star Wars, this film attempted to ride the wave of galactic adventure, but what shocked audiences was how wildly off-kilter it all felt. The film presented a space opera filled with robots, laser battles, and aliens, but all filtered through Italian ingenuity and a shoestring budget. Sets looked like repurposed warehouses, costumes resembled carnival outfits, and special effects relied on glowing shapes that barely resembled spaceships. Yet, somehow, it all came together as an earnest attempt to capture the magic of interstellar adventure. Audiences at the time were shocked at the sheer boldness. Hollywood had revolutionized the genre with cutting-edge technology, and Italy responded with cardboard sets and bright lights. The gap between ambition and execution was so wide, it stunned viewers into awe. But here's the twist. It didn't fade into obscurity. Clips circulated for decades, keeping its reputation alive as one of the most audacious Star Wars imitators. What makes Star Odyssey truly shocking is its sincerity. It wasn't trying to be campy. It was trying to inspire wonder. And that earnestness, paired with bargain bin effects, created a surreal charm. Today it's remembered as a cult gem, proof that Italian cinema would rather risk total embarrassment than play it safe. Watching it, you can't help but be shocked that anyone thought it would work, and even more shocked that it still entertains. Spacemen, 1960. Before Italians shocked the world with horror in space, there was Spacemen, a curious attempt to create a sleek astronaut adventure. Released in 1960, it followed the crew of a space station facing mysterious dangers as they orbited Earth. On paper, It sounded like a standard sci-fi story. But what shocked audiences wasn't just the tale itself. It was the visuals. The costumes looked more like stylish racing suits. The sets gleamed with a retro-futuristic shine. And the whole production had an uncanny vibe, as though Italy was designing its own version of NASA through a dreamlike lens. Audiences were caught off guard by how bold the film looked compared to Italy's previous cinema. While American films gave space a sense of exploration and optimism, Spacemen felt stranger, almost alien in its presentation. The film's glossy sheen couldn't hide its darker undertones, humans adrift in a cold void, utterly unprepared for what might be waiting out there. That sense of eerie detachment was unsettling, especially for audiences in 1960 who were still wrapping their heads around the real space race. Though not a massive international success, Spacemen shocked simply by existing, it proved Italian studios were willing to compete in a genre dominated by Hollywood. The costumes, the strange design choices, and the quiet tension made it stand apart. Looking back, it feels like a surreal time capsule, where optimism about the stars was mixed with a distinctly Italian flair for the uncanny. The Mechanical Man, 1921. Long before astronauts and alien invasions, Italy gave us something almost unthinkable for its era, a full-on robot movie. The Mechanical Man, released in 1921, is one of the earliest sci-fi films anywhere in the world. Its story revolved around a towering robot, controlled remotely, being used for crime and destruction. Watching this in the early 20th century must have felt like staring directly into the future. What shocked audiences was not just the concept, but the execution. The sight of a massive machine wreaking havoc on city streets was unlike anything people had seen on film before. Remember, this was decades before Hollywood's giant robot fantasies. Italy did it first, and it did it with silent-era creativity. The final showdown, two robots clashing in a destructive battle, was a sequence so wild for its time that audiences couldn't believe their eyes. Unfortunately, much of the film has been lost, with only fragments surviving today. But even those fragments reveal why it was so impactful. To see a society in 1921 wrestle with the idea of machines rising against their masters was both thrilling and terrifying. The film planted seeds that would later grow into countless sci-fi staples. For its audience, the shock was pure. Could this really be the direction technology was heading? The Mechanical Man didn't just entertain, it foreshadowed fears we're still debating today. Flashman, 1967. Superheroes were booming in the United States, so naturally Italy decided to throw its own colorful cape into the ring with Flashman. But instead of a polished Marvel-style adventure, audiences were met with something wildly different. Flashman was a hero who looked the part, but moved through a story so chaotic and unpredictable that viewers were left stunned. The shock came from how bizarrely the film blended pulp, adventure with science fiction. Flashman faced off against mad scientists, futuristic gadgets, and schemes of global domination. But the film's tone wavered constantly. One moment it was deadly serious. The next, it felt like parody. The costumes popped with comic book energy, yet the action scenes were staged with a mix of ambition and clumsiness that left people laughing in disbelief. What set Flashman apart was how it refused to pick a lane. Instead of copying American superhero formulas directly, it filtered them through Italian eccentricity. That created a superhero film that felt both familiar and completely alien. Audiences were shocked because it didn't follow expectations. It embraced unpredictability. Though not as well remembered as other entries on this list, Flashman has its cult admirers. It shocked not with gore or darkness, but with sheer absurdity. For audiences, it was a wake-up call that superheroes could look wildly different outside Hollywood. Love it or hate it, nobody left the theater forgetting what they'd just seen. Encounters in the Deep, 1979. When most sci-fi of the 1970s looked toward the stars, Encounters in the Deep looked down into the ocean. This Italian curiosity mixed UFO paranoia with deep-sea mystery, creating a film that felt unsettlingly unique. The story followed divers investigating strange lights underwater, leading to hints of alien presence beneath the waves. That alone was enough to shock audiences. Aliens weren't just out there, they might be hiding in the oceans we thought we knew. The underwater sequences gave the film a haunting quality. Murky visuals, divers drifting through eerie silence, and sudden bursts of strange activity kept viewers uneasy. Unlike sleek space operas, this film leaned into atmosphere and dread. The idea that the ocean could harbor alien civilizations struck audiences as both fascinating and terrifying. After all, the deep sea is one of Earth's last true mysteries. What better place to hide something unearthly? Audiences in 1979 were surprised by how different this felt compared to the space adventures saturating the market. The slow pace, the unsettling underwater imagery, and the ambiguous encounters all contributed to an eerie shock factor. It wasn't the loud spectacle of Hollywood, but the quiet suggestion that something incomprehensible was waiting just beneath the surface. Encounters in the Deep might not be a household name, but its lasting shock comes from how it flipped expectations. Instead of pointing telescopes upward, it forced viewers to wonder what horrors might already be lurking below. Another End 2023. And finally, we end with a recent Italian entry that shocked audiences in an entirely new way. Another End. Unlike the wild pulp of the 60s or the exploitation chaos of the 80s, this film is deeply modern, contemplative, and emotionally devastating. It tells the story of grief in a near-future society where memories can be transferred to others, blurring the line between life and loss. Audiences weren't shocked by rubber monsters or collapsing cities, but by how intimately the film explored human emotions through sci-fi. The concept, resurrecting the presence of a loved one by implanting memories into another person, was both fascinating and deeply disturbing. What would it really mean to interact with someone who wasn't quite themselves, but carried the shadow of someone you lost? The film's tone is quiet, almost meditative, yet it left viewers rattled. Instead of explosions or aliens, it delivered gut-punch questions about identity, mourning, and how far we'd go to ease pain. Italian cinema has always been unafraid of raw emotion, and here it fused that with speculative technology in a way that startled modern audiences. Another End shocked not because it was bizarre, but because it was too real. In a world already grappling with AI, digital afterlives, and the ethics of memory, its story felt like tomorrow's headlines. Ending our list here reminds us that Italian sci-fi isn't just a relic of the past. It's still finding ways to disturb, surprise, and challenge us today. From robots stomping across silent-era screens to alien terrors hiding beneath the waves, Italian sci-fi has never played it safe. These 15 films prove that Italy's imagination has always been wild, daring, and ready to shock. Some made you laugh, some left you unsettled, and some still haunt the genre decades later. Which one grabbed you the most, the eerie classics or the outrageous cult oddities? Drop your thoughts below, subscribe for more deep dives, and remember, the strangest frontiers in cinema often come from the places you least expect. Italian science fiction has never played by the rules. While Hollywood promised sleek spaceships and shiny futures, Italy delivered chaos, color, and imagination that left audiences stunned. What happens when a country known for opera and giallo horror points its camera toward the stars? You get movies that confuse, amaze, and sometimes leave you wondering if you actually saw what you think you saw. Are you ready for 12 more wild entries that prove Italian sci-fi was stranger than you ever imagined? War Between the Planets, 1966. What if the Earth itself turned against you? That's the central nightmare of Antonio Margheriti's War Between the Planets, a movie that took the optimism of the space race and twisted it into a story of cosmic collapse. Released in 1966, this wasn't your average space adventure with clean-cut heroes saving the day. Instead, it asked audiences to imagine a planet tearing itself apart and humanity scrambling to survive before the world literally swallowed them whole. Margheriti, often called Italy's master of miniatures, filled the screen with crumbling models of Earth's crust and eerie cosmic visuals that looked like nightmares splashed in neon. His background in low-budget spectacle meant that even a collapsing planet was staged with practical tricks, smoke, and clever lighting. It may not have had Hollywood money, but it delivered shock value through pure imagination. Audiences expecting another rocket launch story instead found themselves staring at the end of the world. The movie's most unsettling element wasn't the effects, though. It was the mood. Scientists bickered, the government panicked, and no one seemed in control. That felt bold in the 1960 seconds, when most sci-fi still treated science as a shining beacon. Here, science was fragile, easily overwhelmed by forces beyond human control. The result was a film that made you feel small, as if the planet itself could betray you at any moment. Critics dismissed it as pulp, but fans embraced its energy. Over the years, War Between the Planets became a cult favorite, shocking not with gore, but with existential dread. It dared to imagine Earth itself as the enemy, and that was a twist audiences never forgot. Snow Devils 1967. You've heard of alien invasions, you've heard of government conspiracies, but what about alien yetis hiding in the Alps? That's the bizarre premise of Snow Devils, another entry from Antonio Margheriti's wild sci-fi cycle of the 1960 seconds. Released in 1967, this film mashed up creature feature chills with Cold War paranoia, and the result left viewers scratching their heads in disbelief. The movie begins with mysterious attacks in the snowy mountains, which locals blame on avalanches. But soon it's revealed that the culprits are towering creatures disguised as yetis, secretly tied to a plot of extraterrestrial colonization. Yes, the film claimed that aliens were staging their invasion by posing as mythological beasts. That twist alone shocked audiences. It wasn't just science fiction. It was folklore, pulp, and paranoia jammed together like a cinematic snowball. Visually, Snow Devils leaned into icy landscapes and glowing alien tech. The stark contrast of white mountains and neon gadgets gave it an uncanny vibe, like a James Bond thriller filtered through a fever dream. Margheriti used his trademark miniatures for avalanches and alien bases, and while the effects sometimes looked campy, they carried an eerie charm. What made the film memorable, though, was its mood of mistrust. Governments argued, scientists doubted each other, and all the while the supposed monsters lurked in the background. Audiences in 1967 were already living with real fears about Cold War infiltration, and Snow Devils played directly into that tension. The film suggested that the enemy might be disguised among us, hiding in plain sight. Critics laughed at the absurdity, but that was part of its shock. It blended alien, invasion tropes with myth and conspiracy in a way no Hollywood film dared to. Today, it survives as a cult gem, shocking viewers not with polished spectacle, but with the sheer audacity of its ideas. Watching it feels like stumbling into a strange dream, where aliens, snow, and paranoia collide. The Wild Wild Planet 1966. Now imagine stepping into the future and finding not sleek utopias, but twisted experiments. That's exactly what The Wild Wild Planet offered. Another creation from Antonio Margheriti's fertile imagination, this 1966 film was part of his famous Gamma 1 series. But this wasn't just rockets and astronauts. Instead, audiences were hit with something stranger, scientists kidnapping people to create an army of mutants with grotesque powers. The movie's imagery was enough to stick in your head forever. Picture glamorous women turned into experimental puppets, walking the streets like eerie mannequins. Add to that, laboratories filled with bubbling contraptions and eerie surgical chambers, and you had something closer to a fever dream than a standard space story. Audiences expecting shiny space adventures suddenly found themselves watching a mad scientist's nightmare spill across the screen. What shocked people most was the tonal clash. On one hand, the sets were drenched in bold colors and futuristic style that looked like something out of a 1960 seconds fashion magazine. On the other hand, the storyline was pure pulp horror, filled with body manipulation and sinister experiments. It wasn't optimistic science fiction, it was a twisted warning about technology gone out of control. The performances added to the chaos. Actors delivered dialogue with stone-faced seriousness, even as the plot spiraled into bizarre territory. The result was unsettling. Was this supposed to be camp? Was it supposed to be terrifying? The answer was both, and that confusion gave the film its enduring shock factor. Though mocked by critics at the time, The Wild Wild Planet built a cult following. Viewers couldn't forget its bold visuals and disturbing undertones. It shocked not because of gore, but because it suggested the future might not be heroic at all. It might be a playground for people with the darkest ambitions. Battle of the Worlds 1961. When Italian sci-fi decided to go serious, the results could be just as shocking. Battle of the Worlds, released in 1961, carried the weight of a major name. Claude Rains, the Hollywood veteran who once terrified audiences in The Invisible Man. Seeing him in an Italian production gave the movie instant credibility, but what unfolded was anything but standard fare. The story begins with a rogue planet entering Earth's orbit, threatening global disaster. Sounds familiar, right? But the way Battle of the Worlds unfolded stunned its audience. Instead of focusing on one heroic astronaut or a single government's response, it played like a cold, detached portrait of humanity, facing something incomprehensible. Rains portrayed Professor Benson, a brilliant but abrasive scientist who treats the possible destruction of Earth with icy calm. His lack of sentiment was as shocking as the cosmic threat itself. The film's visuals leaned heavily on Margheriti's love for miniatures. Planets spun across matte-painted skies, rockets blasted through space on visible wires, and models of cities crumbled under disaster. Yet the overall tone wasn't campy. It was strangely grim. For audiences in the early 60 seconds, still grappling with the fear of nuclear war, this detached view of planetary doom felt chillingly real. What made the movie shocking wasn't just the visuals, but its philosophy. Rain's character argued that human lives were insignificant compared to cosmic forces, a statement that undercut every heroic convention audiences expected. Instead of cheering on saviors, viewers were forced to sit with the idea that Earth might not matter at all in the grand scheme of the universe. Though, it wasn't a blockbuster. Battle of the Worlds became a cult classic precisely because it dared to be bleak. Italian sci-fi shocked not with monsters this time, but with a worldview so cold it left audiences unsettled long after the credits rolled. Cosmos, War of the Planets, 1977. By the late 1972s, the world had been shaken by Star Wars. Every country wanted its own space opera, and Italy was no exception. But Cosmos, War of the Planets, directed by Alfonso Brescia, wasn't just a copy. It was something far stranger, a film so drenched in neon visuals and offbeat energy that it shocked audiences into silence. The story is classic pulp. Astronauts encounter a hostile planet run by a supercomputer bent on enslaving them. But it's not the story that grabs you, it's the atmosphere. Instead of sleek spaceships, you get glowing corridors lit like discotheques. Instead of convincing robots, you get stiff, humanoid machines that shuffle across the screen like mannequins. The special effects weren't revolutionary, but they were unforgettable, cheap, colorful, and hypnotic in their own way. Audiences in 1977 were expecting a thrill ride like George Lucas delivered. What they got instead was a surreal fever dream. Dialogue drifted into philosophical tangents about machines and humanity, and the pacing often slowed into long, eerie sequences where you couldn't quite tell if you were supposed to be amazed or confused. That tension was exactly what shocked people. It wasn't polished, but it was bold. Critics dismissed it as a bargain bin knockoff. Yet, over time, Cosmos, War of the Planets, gained its own reputation. Fans began to see it not as a failed imitation, but as an unintentional experiment in psychedelic sci-fi. Its neon glow, its awkward sincerity, and its bizarre tone made it unforgettable. What makes the film shocking today is how committed it islanded. It didn't wink at the audience, it didn't try to be camp. It really believed in its vision of cosmic struggle, no matter how odd the execution. And that sincerity turned a would-be copycat into one of Italy's most eccentric sci-fi spectacles. War of the Robots, 1978. Golden armored androids, stiff space battles, and dialogue that feels like it was beamed in from another dimension. That's War of the Robots. Released in 1978 and directed by Alfonso Brescia, this movie wasn't shy about chasing the Star Wars wave, but instead of polished spectacle, it offered something far stranger. Audiences who came in expecting Luke Skywalker got golden warriors with frozen expressions and space duels that felt like cosmic theater. The plot follows a group of astronauts trying to rescue kidnapped scientists from an alien race that builds armies of humanoid robots. On paper, that sounds familiar enough. But what shocked people was the execution. Costumes gleamed like carnival outfits. Spaceships looked like toys suspended in light beams, and entire battles unfolded in a way that was both clumsy and mesmerizing. You couldn't take your eyes off it, even when it made no sense. What really set this apart was how seriously it took itself. The actors delivered lines with absolute conviction, even while surrounded by cardboard sets and stilted robots. That sincerity created an uncanny tension. Was it parody? Was it genuine? Viewers weren't sure, and that confusion was part of the shock. Critics panned it, of course, calling it one of the strangest space operas ever made. But fans, especially cult movie lovers, embraced it. Late-night TV reruns and bootleg VHS tapes spread its reputation, turning it into a must-see oddity. War of the Robots didn't just shock by failing to be Star Wars. It shocked by showing how far Italian cinema was willing to go in reimagining the genre on a shoestring budget. Today, its golden androids remain some of the most iconic images in Italian sci-fi history, not because they were convincing, but because they were unforgettable. Message from Space, 1978. Sometimes Italian sci-fi didn't work alone. Message from Space was a collaboration with Japan, but its Italian release cemented its place in Europe's sci-fi cult library. Audiences in 1978 thought they were about to see another obvious Star Wars clone. Instead, they got something shockingly original, a tale of glowing seeds, galactic destiny, and warriors brought together by cosmic chance. Directed by Kinji Fukasaku in Japan, but released and marketed in Italy as if it were partly their own, this film mixed samurai codes, spaghetti western energy, and pulp futurism. Imagine Seven Samurai in space, but drenched in neon colors and surreal imagery. The Italian audience had never seen anything like it. Instead of clean space battles, they got chaotic duels lit by glowing effects and heroes who looked like they had wandered in from a fantasy epic. What shocked people most was the sheer boldness. This wasn't pretending to be realistic. It was full-on myth, with characters chosen by glowing seeds that floated through the galaxy like divine messengers. That mystical edge set it apart from the hard science stories of the 1960 seconds. Suddenly, sci-fi wasn't about astronauts anymore. It was about destiny, honor, and dreamlike adventure. For Italian fans, it was a revelation. The mix of cultural styles gave the movie an energy that no Hollywood production had. Sure, it was sometimes clumsy, and the glowing seeds could look ridiculous, but it carried an emotional weight that stuck. Today, Message from Space is remembered as one of the strangest and most heartfelt entries in the post-Star Wars explosion. It shocked not because it failed, but because it dared to turn science fiction into something closer to opera. Mission Stardust, 1967. Before superheroes and space operas dominated the box office, Italy dipped into pulp science fiction with Mission Stardust. Released in 1967, it was based on the German Perry Rhodan novels, which were wildly popular across Europe. On paper, this should have been straightforward. Space explorers encounter aliens and save the world. But the Italian-German production turned it into something far stranger. The movie opens with Perry Rhodan's ship landing on the moon, only to discover an alien vessel carrying a dying princess. That setup alone stunned audiences. Suddenly, the moon wasn't a barren rock, but a stage for galactic destiny. The explorers strike a deal. They'll help save the alien princess if her people share their advanced medicine with Earth. But of course, things spiral into betrayals, conspiracies, and action that feels half spy thriller, half space epic. What shocked people most was the tone. This wasn't optimistic space travel. It was cynical, shadowy, and more in line with Cold War thrillers. The sets looked futuristic but carried a gritty edge, and the aliens felt mysterious rather than welcoming. Instead of clear heroes and villains, everyone seemed suspicious. The film's odd pacing also left audiences rattled. One moment you were in a space opera, the next you were in a noir conspiracy tale. That whiplash created a uniquely unsettling effect. It wasn't Hollywood sleekness, it was European pulp stitched together into something unpredictable. Though critics didn't know what to make of it, Mission Stardust developed a cult following. Fans were shocked not by giant monsters or world-ending disasters, but by how seriously it treated pulp material. It felt more like a secret agent film that stumbled into space, and that bizarre mix is exactly why people still talk about it today. Warriors of the Year, 2072194. What happens when you throw gladiators, dystopian futures, and Italian flair into a blender? You get Warriors of the Year 2072, a Lucio Fulci-directed spectacle that shocked audiences with its brutal vision of televised combat. Released in 1984, the film imagined a society where entertainment had devolved into deadly arena matches, broadcast to a battered population numbed by violence. Sound familiar? It should. It was decades ahead of the Hunger Games and other arena dystopias. The movie opens with a chilling premise. Prisoners are forced into high-tech gladiator battles inside massive arenas, their every move broadcast live. The crowds cheer, the government profits, and humanity slowly loses its soul. Fulci, best known for horror, brought his trademark intensity to science fiction, and it left viewers unsettled. This wasn't glamorous heroism, it was exploitation turned into entertainment, with chilling echoes of Rome's ancient colosseums. Visually, the film delivered shock through sheer contrast. Futuristic sets gleamed with sterile steel, while the gladiatorial fights felt raw and chaotic. The combination made audiences feel both fascinated and disturbed. One moment you were marveling at neon corridors, the next you were watching desperate figures fighting for survival in stage spectacles. The commentary hit harder than expected. In an era when TV was rapidly expanding and mass media was shaping culture, Warriors of the Year 2072 asked a dark question. What if the screen demanded not just drama, but real suffering? That question shocked audiences more than any special effect. While not a mainstream success, the film became a cult treasure. It shocked by predicting a future where humanity's thirst for spectacle outweighs its morality. Watching it now feels eerie, as if Fulci saw into the DNA of modern reality shows and twisted it into a nightmare decades before anyone else dared. Hands of Steel 1986. Imagine a cross between the Terminator and a truck stop brawl, and you've got Hands of Steel. Released in 1986 and directed by Sergio Martino, this movie shocked audiences not because it was polished, but because it was so brazen. It told the story of Paco Cuauhtémoc, a cyborg assassin who defies his programming and tries to reclaim his humanity. On the surface, it's another robot versus man tale. But what set it apart was how unapologetically Italian it felt. From the opening moments, the film hit with a raw energy. Paco isn't a sleek, emotionless machine. He's a conflicted figure, torn between his programming and his conscience. Instead of high-tech labs and gleaming skyscrapers, much of the action unfolds in grimy diners, desert motels, and underground arm wrestling arenas. Yes, arm wrestling. One of the movie's most shocking twists was how it turned a simple barroom contest into a metaphor for survival. Audiences in the 1980 seconds, already familiar with Hollywood's polished cyborg stories, weren't prepared for this kind of grit. The fights felt desperate, the villains were cartoonishly menacing, and the atmosphere was thick with exploitation charm. What shocked people wasn't just the violence, but the heart buried underneath. Paco's struggle to resist control wasn't played for laughs. It was surprisingly emotional, especially for a movie that looked like it should have been pure pulp. Critics dismissed it as a ripoff, but fans saw something more. Over time, Hands of Steel gained cult status for its mix of muscle, neon, and unexpected sincerity. It's shocked by proving that, even in a film dripping with campy action, questions about free will and humanity could still sneak in. Endgame 1983. In the early 1980 seconds, Italian sci-fi turned toward post-apocalyptic nightmares, and Endgame stands out as one of the wildest. Directed by Joe D'Amato in 1983, this film shocked audiences by combining mutant telepaths, dystopian gladiators, and grimy cityscapes into one chaotic vision of the future. It didn't just imitate Mad Max, it mashed that energy with Italy's love for pulp excess. The setup is classic dystopia. In a ruined New York of the future, society survives by feeding on televised blood sport. Our protagonist, a gladiator named Ron Shannon, is forced to lead a team of mutants with psychic powers across a dangerous wasteland, while the ruling elite's place bets on his survival. It's part chase movie, part survival thriller, and part mutant soap opera. Audiences weren't sure what they were watching, but they couldn't look away. What shocked people most was the blend of tones. One moment you'd see gritty street fights that felt raw and desperate. The next you'd encounter mutants with glowing eyes using strange psychic powers. That mix of grindhouse action and paranormal spectacle gave the movie an unhinged energy. It wasn't clean or polished. It was messy, unpredictable, and thrilling in its audacity. Visually, Endgame leaned into dystopian decay. Crumbling cityscapes, barren wastelands, and harsh lighting gave the film a sense of hopelessness. But instead of delivering despair, it turned survival into a spectacle. The commentary wasn't subtle. Media and power thrive on human suffering. That message, paired with bizarre mutants, shocked audiences far more than the rubbery effects. Though not widely acclaimed, Endgame became a cult treasure, remembered as one of Italy's most brazen takes on post-apocalyptic storytelling. It shocked by refusing to pick a lane, blending action, horror, and sci-fi into one unforgettable ride. 2019. After the Fall of New York, 1983. Few Italian sci-fi films shocked audiences quite like 2019, After the Fall of New York. Directed by Sergio Martino and released in 1983, it blended the grit of Escape from New York with the feral chaos of Mad Max. But this wasn't just imitation. It was a nightmare vision that left viewers stunned by its sheer intensity. The story takes place after a global catastrophe, where a mercenary named Parsifal is tasked with finding the last fertile woman on Earth, hidden in the ruins of New York. That mission sounds simple, but the journey is anything but. Mutant gangs roam the streets, bizarre tribes guard the wastelands, and every corner of the city feels like a booby-trapped nightmare. Audiences were shocked by how relentless it all felt. There was no safe space, no pause, just constant tension. What really set it apart was its world building. Instead of shiny spaceships, the future looked like rusting cars, scorched skyscrapers, and burned-out tunnels. The costumes mixed punk, medieval armor, and pure fantasy, creating a look that was equal parts absurd and terrifying. Viewers couldn't decide if they should laugh at the spectacle or shiver at how raw it felt. The film's underlying message added another layer of shock. Instead of offering hope, it painted a bleak picture of humanity's future, where survival is brutal and compassion is scarce. For Italian audiences in the 1980 seconds, still living under Cold War fears, that vision struck a chord. It wasn't just sci-fi, it was a mirror of anxieties that felt all too real. Over the years, 2019, After the Fall of New York has earned cult status, shocking not just for its violence but for its audacity. It dared to imagine a future where humanity had nearly given up, and it did so with a style that only Italian cinema could pull off. So, there you have it, 12 more Italian sci-fi films that didn't just entertain, they blindsided audiences with strange ideas, wild visuals, and bold energy. From glowing robots to post-apocalyptic gladiators, these movies proved that Italy never played it safe with science fiction. Which one shocked you the most, the mutant nightmares, the alien yetis, or the neon-drenched space operas? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more cinematic deep dives. After all, the weirdest journeys through space often come from the most unexpected places.